Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. It is 18 after 8 o'clock, and it seems as if it is all systems go. I just had a bit of a moment there with my controller, but that has been sorted out. Let's cross over to Palestine, and our first guest is Yasser Abujamei. Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the program. Okay, I can't hear you. Can you just can you unmute, please? I
Yeah,
can't
thank
hear
you very
you.
much. Thank you very much. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, obviously, this is a very serious discussion we're having. I think whenever we have a guest from your part of the world, it is always very, very heartbreaking and serious issues that we unpack on the show. And we here at Salam Media strive to keep the struggles of the Palestinian people alive in the minds of South Africa and the rest of the world. This time around, we know that there's been a truce between the Israeli occupiers and obviously the Palestinian people. We do hope and pray that it is holding up after the horrific 3-day incursion on the Palestinian people. What I'd like to talk about this morning is a little while ago we had heard that there's a large number of Palestinian child prisoners being held by the occupiers, the Israeli occupiers. And I'm wondering what it does to the psyche of the rest of the Palestinian people, but particularly to those children who are held in possibly detention without trial, who are held in solitary confinement. Their mental health must take a terrible toll. And you are with the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. Let us understand when this organization was formed, what you are doing to address this particular problem.
Thank you very much. Well, if I could say, first of all, the word ceasefire or that there is a truce or something like that is something that is really not 100% accurate. For example, although the attacks stopped 2 days ago, but still we hear the drones that are, flying the skies. We have around us many things that remind us of the traumatic events that happened. We have in our memories, of course, another 4 attacks that happened earlier. Our children remember those attacks. They are fully aware that we are under occupation, and that that there is no bombardment today or yesterday. It doesn't mean that we are back to safety, but it means that we are still under occupation. We are still suffering, and in order to feel that you are safe, you need at least to end the blockade and in the occupation. And this was confirmed really by a study that was made by Save the Children. It was announced 3 weeks ago. Imagine that 3 weeks ago or about a month ago, they announced that about 90% of children in Gaza Strip, they feel less safe when they are away from their parents. And that was prior to the recent attacks. Imagine when they speak about the caregivers, the parents, they speak that more than 96% of them, they report feeling unhappy and anxious. Two-thirds of the caregivers feel that they are not useful. Useful means to be able to protect your child, to be able to make them feel safe and secure. The other issue, as you mentioned, speaking of the children who are imprisoned in Israeli jails. And I would like to bring the attention of the audience to the case of Ahmad Manasri. Ahmad Manasri was
Absolutely.
put into jail about 10 years ago. He was then about, if I remember, 14 years old or 12 years old. Now he grown up into a young adolescent. But he has a lot of suffering,
Okay, we just seem to have lost Yasser Abujamei. Let's take a quick break and try and reconnect with Yasser Abujamei. He's talking to us from the Gaza Strip. He's talking to us about the mental health and well-being of the children of Gaza and the entire Palestine, and particularly the children that are imprisoned at a very tender age. What does their futures look like once they have been released from prison. Um, Clearly, absolutely broken human beings who possibly cannot make a meaningful contribution to society at all. But let's pick up on that issue in a minute or two, a short break, and we'll try and reconnect with Yasser Abujamei.
To find your truth, find a new you before you're due. Nothing to do with the old you. Let it all fade, you'll find your way. Just trust your faith. Let it all go, and soon you'll know why you felt so low. Let it all fade, you'll find your way. Just trust your faith. Let it all go, and soon you'll know.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media.
لا تقل لي وحدي أو كيف السبيل.
Humanity sets the agenda.
It is exactly 8:25 a.m. We are having problems connecting up with Yasser Abujamei. He's based in the in Gaza in Palestine, talking to us about the conditions or the mental health and well-being of people in the Gaza, particularly children, or the entire Palestine for that matter, and then also the issue around children who are imprisoned by the Israeli occupiers. Now, let's just go to the other side of the world and let's go to the United States and let's look at their issues around children in prisons. What we're hearing from them, they've done a study and they are suggesting that nearly a quarter of both state prisoners and jail inmates who had a mental health problem, compared to a fifth of those without, had served 3 or more prior incarcerations. What they're actually saying here is that children or young adults or teenagers, for that matter, uh, normally end up in prison in the United States simply because they've presented with mental health problems before they go on to offend. And then once they have offended, perhaps the first time or repeatedly, and they then get caught by the authorities, they then get imprisoned. But the situation here is simply because they do already have a pre-existing mental health problem, and because they don't behave or interact in a normal way with other people, they then go on to offend, and eventually they end up in prison. So the report compares the characteristics of offenders with a mental health problem to those without, including current offenses, criminal record, sentence length, time expected to be served, co-occurring substance dependence or abuse, family background, and facility conduct since current admission. It presents measures of mental health problems by gender, race, Hispanic origin, and age. The report describes mental health problems and mental health treatment among inmates since admission to jail or prison. And the findings are based on the survey of inmates in state and federal correction facilities in the year 2004, and also goes back to the year 2002. So this clearly indicates that people who are imprisoned in the United States, mainly young adults and adolescents, are obviously they have presented with mental health issues, and they say that 1 in 4 federal prisoners had presented with mental health issues, and that's why they eventually ended up in jail. And 1 in 6 inmates who had mental health problems have received treatments since admission. So their situation is very different to the situation that we are discussing with Yasser Abujamei regarding the mental health situation of children and young adults in um, in Israeli Israeli prisons, and they doing this. Obviously, they imprisoning children on the slightest of pretext, and they are breaking the spirit of these children. Once these children are released and go back into what we know as normal society, though the Palestinian situation could never be viewed as normal, but they go back into society, they are broken already. How are they expected to lead a normal life? Let's weigh in on Yasser Abu Jameh once again. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the program.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Uh, Sorry, I'm now connected through the internet and through the phone. Should I turn off the phone? I think.
Whatever you are comfortable with and whatever is not going to make me lose you, because this is a very important discussion. And I think you've heard my overview,
Yeah.
making a comparison with the Palestinian situation to that of a first world country like the United States of America, which is also supposed to be a superpower. Uh, what are your comments regarding that lengthy statement?
Well, I would say that people who are put in prison, and especially children, the children who are put in prison in Israeli jails, they are not criminals. These are young children who are living under occupation, who are suffering on daily basis, who are having problems just with daily life. For example, now in West Bank, many of the children who need to go to schools, they just have to to pass through cross points, or they have to turn around the separation wall rather than to go for like tens of meters. They have to pass through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kilometers in order to reach their schools. So the children react really to the living environment that they live in, and sometimes when they react, they throw a stone or they do something else. They just expose themselves to the very aggressive, how to say, uh, uh,
Punishment.
punishment. Exactly, I'm looking
Mhm.
for the word. By the Israeli military occupation, by the Israeli court, that is one way or the other systematically punishing the people because they speak up for their rights, because they are struggling with their daily life, because they speak up and they show that they are frustrated with the conditions. And uh, there isn't a need to say that, but for an audience like the brothers and sisters in South Africa, we started speaking now for years about being in an apartheid state by all what it means.
Absolutely.
It's not only occupation, but it's only also an apartheid state. So for a person who is put into jail, either uh, through a court decision or under administrative detention, what's called, that could continue for days or for years, there is a need to have if the prisoner will leave the prison, will be released from the prison without being really psychologically affected, then that's something good. But you need all the time to have a big rehabilitation, let me say, intervention in order to make sure that those people, especially children, they are returning back to their society and that they are capable of leading a normal life. A child is supposed to play, is supposed to learn, is supposed to receive some education, is supposed to be hugely, let me say, or overwhelmingly cared of by caring parents, by a society, by, for example, extended society. But this doesn't happen to a child who's spending years or weeks in prison. So there is a need for rehabilitation service. And that's a big part of what GCMHP do since our establishment in 1990. Our establisher, Iyad Sarraj, who was a human rights advocate and also psychiatrist, started the Gaza Community Mentality Program because we wanted to apply a biopsychosocial model that would look into not only the medical aspect of the life of the children and families, but also into the psychological aspects and the environmental aspects. Then it was the first intifada, and it was clear that the psychiatric hospital, who was then the only facility in Gaza Strip, is not a suitable place to deal with people who are traumatized, people who have some mild symptoms, parents who are worrying about their children, mental health, etc., etc. So we began as one community center. Now we have 3 community centers across Gaza Strip. We have another 5 mobile stations that aim at making our services accessible. We try our best to offer comprehensive mental health care, through which we have a team of a psychologist, a social worker, a nurse, in addition to the psychiatrist who's working with the clients. In addition to that, we have a unit for rehabilitation, an occupational rehabilitation unit that aim at helping some of the severely affected people go back to their normal routine life. Now, when we speak about ex-prisoners, when we speak about those who come back to, if I could say, life after years of being imprisoned, they are perceived in the community as heroes, you know, and this is for quite obvious reasons. However, it's important to say that those people have gone through suffering. They were put in jail. They were sometimes put into solitary confinement. They were exposed to a lot of stresses. They were threatened. Their family members were threatened. And to be able to cope with all those difficulties, to be able to restore normal life and to go back to normal life, you need a lot of rehabilitation work.
Okay, so clearly, the example I used about the American adolescents is really mild in comparison with the Palestinian situation, because apart from being imprisoned, for those children who are imprisoned, uh, children that still try to continue and families that continue the daily life are still subject to huge trauma, anxiety on a daily basis. As you've indicated, children just going to school have to pass several checkpoints. People cut off from their relatives that's living in different parts of Palestine and don't have access, regular or daily access to the relatives. If you want to visit a hospital, if you've got to go through certain checkpoints, it also means that you might be queuing for the entire day there, and come the evening, you may not be given access into the area that you needed to go to meet relatives, friends, perhaps medical facilities, medical care, etc. So having to undergo all of that trauma as it is and then land up in prison, it's really a double whammy. And we're not even sure what those conditions are like in prisons, what sort of torture those children are being put through. When they finally do come out, Yasser, and when you and your organization start working with these children, they obviously are very broken, and it must take possibly months or years of rehabilitative treatment for them to be almost normal, or normal in the Palestinian sense of the word, because it could never be normal by international standards. We can't even begin to imagine the hardships and the trauma you undergo on a daily basis, you and the rest of the Palestinians.
Well, we always say that we don't live, as you mentioned, in or under regular circumstances. For example, when you speak about the trauma in most of the areas in the world, or in Western societies, in Western countries, there is a normal life. Everyone is enjoying his life. Everything is fine. Children go to schools, parents go to work, for example. At the weekend, we have fun, etc., etc. And then suddenly there is a traumatic event, something that is sudden, that is impactful, that is causing a threat to the lives of people, endanger them, their friends, etc., etc., etc. And then that traumatic event passes. That serious event ends, and people try to restore their life, and they go back to their normal functioning as soon as possible. And accompanying that, there will be some rehabilitation services, some psychological intervention, some sort of assessment, support, a crisis resources come in, neighboring countries help, neighboring regions help. But that is typically something that is not happening for Palestinians, two reasons. One is that, well, there is no safety pre the traumatic event. For example, any 20 years old person, 17-year-old child in Gaza today will remember going through 4 different attacks, whether from 2008, 9, then 2012, 14, 21, and now 22, or simply like in West Bank with the night incursion that happen every now and then, that is continuously and furiously happening. So there is no period of safety prior to the traumatic event. Then we speak about the major traumatic event, for example, like the attacks that happened a few days ago, 2 or 3 days of continuous bombardment, sometimes 52 days like in 2014, or sometimes a big incursion into an area like in Nablus, for example, yesterday, that ended up with killing more than 3 people. So that's, for example, a traumatic event. But then what happens after that? We don't really go back to restoring a safe society. We don't back to normal life. We go back again to being under blockade in Gaza, under occupation, under separation wall in the West Bank, under checkpoints every area and the other. So it's more like living under ongoing traumatic conditions. It's like some sort of chronic trauma. And to be able to cope with chronic traumatic event all the time, or chronic traumatic conditions, you need all the time to have some coping dynamics. You have to have faith, for example. You have to have belief that no matter how this is going to end, the arc of justice will come to, and we will live at the end of the day free of the occupation, because occupation will not last. Apartheid will never last forever. It will end one day or the other. But how to help people cope with that? Now, in the same time, unfortunately, the living conditions of the Palestinian people in general are not that easy. When it comes to Gaza Strip, the poverty, for example, is about 53%. 53%, that's more than 500,000 children living families below poverty line. Unemployment rate is around 46, 47%. When it comes to people between the age of 20 and 30, that goes to 70%. So with those very challenging resources, coping is really a big challenge. So we rely on 2 main things, if you could say. One is the faith, the belief that this should end.
Alhamdulillah.
And the other thing is this strong social network, that we have a lot of friends, that we have a lot of family members, that we have cousins, sisters, fathers, mothers, grandparents, etc., etc. And we try to seek support from each other. And then, of course, we have, although we live under blockade, although we live under severe conditions, but we have really very nice teams who are operating on the ground. For example, we have now about 100 staff who work for the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. We try to help people every now and then, as long as it takes. Yesterday, as the attacks, and well, actually during the attacks, for example, we announced our toll-free lines. We announced the mobile numbers of all our staff. Although we ourselves were simply living and hearing the bombardment, we were also caring for our children and our families, but we also gave our phone numbers to our clients who could call and talk. And immediately, once the ceasefire was approached, we went back to work, and now I'm talking from the office in Khan Yunis. So we have those skilled people because we were not only trained, but we have the experience that is through the living of those conditions. We learn from our clients. It's not only that we treat them, actually. After all, I mean, to recover is in the hands of God. We are just tools to do that. But we also learn from our clients. We are happy and we become really very eager when we see a child improves, when we see that child marks deteriorated in the academic performance. However, after our intervention, after spending a few weeks with the children in the play therapy room, after investing a lot of efforts in supporting parents understand what's happening to their children, involving them in the treatment and in the rehabilitation, seeing that those children are back to life, which means back to good academic achievement, which means back to being smiling, feeling happy like all other children, then we feel that there is a sense of achievement. And that is something that really brings us every day to come to our work to try to help as many people as possible.
Alhamdulillah, the resilience of the human spirit and our faith in none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Uh, but that still means that you guys have a huge task. And I'm wondering, you speak about save the children, despite all the odds against the Palestinian people by the occupiers, and their intention is, of course, to break the spirit of the Palestinian people, to hope that you people will just leave the lands and forget about Palestine. But your spirit is way, way stronger than that. Let's look at the support from the international community and how important that is, monetary and otherwise, for you to carry on your amazing work in keeping up the spirit, the mental health and well-being of the spirit of the children of Palestine, and of course the parents as well, because you too are under severe stress regarding all of these issues.
Well, we are really we have a lot of friends and supporters around the world, as Palestinian people in general, and us as mental health practitioners, we have a lot of friends around the world who try to help us, tries to provide care for us when we need that kind of care. And here I would like to mention a very nice South African friend, Professor Ashraf Kaji, from the Stellenbosch University. He used to come to Gaza every year, and even he delivered a training on cognitive behavioral therapy for our therapists about 3 years ago. And he's an excellent example of the sort of cooperation. We have also co-published, co-authored some research studies that looked into occupation, into resilience, into the lives of children, into the university students, etc., etc. And what's important is not only that he's a friend and colleague. He also comes from South Africa, and there are many people who are honest, who understand the suffering of the Palestinian people, who offer support, who offer help. So some of them, they do some training. Now we do some of the activities through Zoom or through online mechanisms. We try to encourage people to come to Gaza really to see how things are here. The blockade is making coming into Gaza difficult. Despite that, we tell people, please try to come to Gaza. At the same time, it's important to come and feel how things are. At the same time, let's keep in mind that for us, it's difficult to go out of Gaza, So my colleagues, if we would like to send someone for training, it takes days, it takes times, it takes, sometimes it doesn't work really because of we were living in a COVID-like situation now for 15 years, to make things, close to the minds of people, because we tell to people in the international community, but you have gone through the era of COVID, those years 2019, 20 with the travel restriction, is something that we in Gaza live under since the year 2007 for 15 years now. So we try to challenge the blockade. We try to communicate with the international community. We try to use online media platforms. We are successful in doing that. That is very nice, but also it's always a better way to have a face-to-face conversation.
Absolutely. So for people like Professor Ashraf Kaji from Stellenbosch, from university, I should imagine they would like to come on an ongoing basis to add as much support as they possibly can. He's just one of the many people whose heart is with the Palestinian people. I should imagine it's very frustrating for them because there must be lots of roadblocks on the way in terms of them having access to Gaza and other areas of Palestine. They want to come, they want to make a meaningful difference, but obviously plenty of restrictions. Is that still the case? Are they still allowed free and open access, or is it months of negotiations before they can get to Palestine to offer whatever assistance they possibly can?
Well, again, it's a very crazy system. People need to apply to the Israeli authorities who are in control of the Erez checkpoint, which is, or Beit Hanun checkpoint, which is the only passage between Gaza and Israel. So people travel to Israel and then they need to come then to Gaza Strip. Now, I don't know how, but if we are not under occupation yet, then why Israel is denying people from coming into Gaza? So it's really ironic. They do the checking usually, and we cannot really apply by ourselves. Who can apply is an international organization. So we ask some of the friend organizations or the partners that we work with to bring to make an application. The application process sometimes take a couple of weeks, sometimes takes more than that. And if like 6 or 7 weeks have passed without an answer, you need to apply again. The responses, whether positive or negative, you cannot really challenge those responses. What you can do is only to apply again. And that makes it very difficult for people to plan, their schedules. We are mental health professionals. All the people who visit us, if not maybe 90% of them, are mental health professionals. They have clients, they have scheduled meetings for their students, for their clients, for their engagements. So it's difficult for them to make the application and wait and see what happens, what will be the answer. The answer could be delayed, etc., etc. And it's very difficult to reschedule your trip time. So those people who come to Gaza and endure those difficulties, again, as you said, their heart is with the Palestinian people. They do that once, twice, 3 times, and they succeed. Most of the time, they succeed to come to Gaza at the end of the day. We hope that these travel restrictions will get eased. We say that this is part of the blockade that is imposed on the Palestinian people. It's part of the policy that Israeli makes in making the Palestinian voices low, not being able to speak to the international community, with the social media, with the friends of Palestinian people who keep putting us and offering us the platform, like this program, for example. They keep our voices reach the people, and we hope, and we are sure, not only we hope, that the blockade is going to come to an end, that this whole occupation is going
Inshallah.
to end one way soon, inshallah.
Yasser Abujamei, a Gaza community mental health worker, talking to us about the mental health and well-being of the children of Gaza, or the children of Palestine, and the children who are imprisoned by the occupiers in Palestine. And of course, I did indicate that this is the intention of the occupiers to break the spirit of the Palestinian people. But Alhamdulillah, our faith runs deep, and we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not give us a burden greater than we can bear, and soon this too shall pass. Go well, keep up the amazing work, and just know that we all have you guys close to our hearts and in our du'as. Assalamu alaikum to
Wa
you.
alaikum assalam. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ma'assalam.
The time is exactly 8:51. It is news and views that you tuned into this morning. Next up is Douglas Muruingi from Kenya to talk to us about the elections in that part of the world.